Hey everybody, this is Oliver Goshey from Climate Farmers, and I'm here to tell you about a new program that we've set up with Richard Perkins and his masterclass called the Pioneer Group Program. Now, this program is a 2-month personalized support system for farmers in Europe who are looking to transition their farm and their land to regenerative practices. Between access to Richard Perkins' masterclass, a facilitator dedicated to help you succeed, weekly skill call exchanges, support materials, and resources, you will have everything that you need to transition your farm to a profitable, regenerative way of running it. But don't take it from me. Now let's talk to Richard himself to see how this program works. In your own experience, how have you seen the core material of this, which is geared towards smaller scale farms, be scaled up and adopted successfully by people with larger acreage?
There's definitely always people that's in the several hundred hectare sort of range, and I would say most of those farmers that come to me, and that's true of our on-site trainings as well as our online training, is those farmers that are looking to diversify and more specifically bring in direct marketed products. So that's one way I could define who my training is for. It's for anyone that wants to direct market crops to the end consumer. If somebody is solely producing commodity crops, I can help them with context setting, land planning, and business problems. But my training is not targeted for those people specifically. So there's probably a third of the material is suitable for people who are working in the commodity market. That's not my focus at all, because that's not what I'm about in any way. So anyone that's looking to direct markets to their customers at any scale, this would be totally appropriate to. And I would say that most of the core backbone of what I would define as regenerative agriculture is scalable, replicable, modular. And so things like defining contexts and business planning is fundamental to all farmers of all scales. Mapping, land design, placements of all the different elements that make up a farm, fencing, water systems, agroforestry systems, keyline design, all that sort of stuff that I specialize in is applicable at any scale. And my professional career has seen me working through all scale of farms up to a farm in Mexico dealing with hundreds of thousands of hectares and looking at, community-wide and ecosystem-wide change. So I'm very familiar with people's contextual and to a large degree cultural issues and concerns. And so I act as a kind of, in some, as far as is possible, I can act one-on-one with people with their specific concerns. And what happens throughout our training is that people are connecting with those that are in similar situations, similar contexts, and are able to form a sort of a subgroup within the training to really focus on the questions that matter for them.
Nice. And can you give me some tangible examples of larger scale farms that have implemented aspects of your pedagogy or your teachings and found success with them?
Yeah, there's like the larger scale farms that I'm working with are either grazing or arable or agroforestry based, and then some specialist things like keyline planning, etc. And we've worked on projects on 4 continents with keyline planning, agroforestry systems. We've sent off many of our students to go and run holistic management operations and get people into transitions on the ground. I've sent people off to set up tree nurseries, to set up agroforestry systems in the tropics and in different parts of the world. And it's really what I've been trying to do is build a network of people who I know to one degree of separation. I think we've talked about this before, of what's been missing for me and perhaps what John Kemp's been creating. I'm not fully sure, but for me, it's really important in this era of, social media and Facebook groups to have some level of integrity through personal connection. So what I do is train up interns here and then try and join them together in different parts of the world where I see that they will be mutually benefited in their business capacities or their learning objectives at that time. And yeah, that's, for me, that's a big part of this, what you're engaging with, the transition of farmers, is to connect people with the right people to get these things done as well. And speaking to bigger farmers who are often based in much more technician roles than what we would do on our farm, say a much smaller scale farm where everything is totally human scale and heavily observation based. And it, you know, the possibilities are limitless. And so it's finding the right people who can scale those ideas appropriately economically, but also efficiently in terms of how to run those operations, that they do not consume a large amount of time from someone who's running busy field operations, and create a lot of value in the meantime. For example, running poultry on a large grazing operation, and often the poultry enterprise will become the main cash cow, as it were. But it's how to formulate that and scale it appropriately to the existing enterprise. And then often some of the work we've done with that is focused very much on simple business, of like how to cut bleeds out of the existing business, or how to turn 25% of it into direct marketed products, so that the same work essentially is leveraged to a much greater end result. And I think what I've experienced working with farmers who are more, let's say, you know, working along traditional lines, is that there's a huge amount of fear and social pressure also about stepping outside of the norm, as it were. And that's one of the biggest barriers, is just fear of the unknown. And, you know, my grandfather did it like this, and that's the way we do here. And so a large part of my work is really based on context setting, and really working on that in a human level, because that's usually the limiting factors. Like there's resources, there's capital, there's nothing limiting it except for creative decision making and confidence to get started. So one big part of the training is to connect people together, to bring people to assist others in that transition.
Yeah, you and I have both noticed that having a supportive community in this transition period is essential, because a lot of people don't find it necessarily in their immediate community around them. And they can feel kind of lonely. It can feel like you don't have other people who are in the same journey, or the support from others who have already been through it. And that can often be sort of that little clinch that makes this transition easier or possible for some people.
Yeah, and I think that's, like, my perspective and feeling, like sort of currently this year, is that the world is changing so fast. And I remember the day probably 5 years ago when I feel like the last valuable Facebook group fell apart. And you know, I'm saying it in a very simple way, but I think it's very hard to trust all the information out there. And so what needs to come next is direct contact with the right people. And so that's the next step. Like, one thing is getting information, getting the tools and resources to be able to change course and plan for a different future. But it really comes down to meeting people in flesh. It's much easier to gain confidence to make changes in your direction when you have that support in flesh, as it were.
Yeah, when
And so I
you
think
find people
that's,
you relate to, that you can see yourself in as well.
yeah, and it's something I hope for the people that come through our trainings, and I hope can be spun out of your work as well. Is, you know, it's amazing what we can do digitally, and it's vital and incredibly efficient, but it needs to then already move on a step after that at some point. And that's a big thing that I push for the people. Like, one amazing thing that's come out of my work with social media and YouTube and the trainings we've run is just seeing the tangible network that's grown of people actually getting up and going off to another country, another continent, and connecting and becoming lifelong friends. And that's a very different thing to, you know, an online group of fairly anonymous people, I'd say.
Definitely. Yeah, much higher quality of connections there. Now, I know one of the aspects of your course that is infinitely scalable and that is often one of the weakest points of new farms or farms in transition is the financial aspect. Can you talk
Mhm.
about how and why you focus so much on this in your training?
Sure. Well, I guess from my journey into farming, which started as a typical young person without a farming family, is that I had very little borrowing power and very little chance of getting access to land. And in my country and in the country I've moved to, it's fairly typical for Western countries in that most farmers are over the age of 65. All their capital is locked up in immobile infrastructure, so they can't afford to get out of farming, and young people can't afford to get in, and that's a problem in every westernized country I've been to. And yet, at the same time, juxtaposed against that, I've seen that the people that I've trained that have gone off and created the most full and um, yeah, the most successful and bountiful businesses are actually people that didn't come from farming backgrounds at all. And often coming from small business backgrounds or from some other studies such as ecology, etc., leads, well, those people are much more malleable in their thinking. And, you know, farmers are stereotypically hard nuts to crack, as it were. It's very hard to change ingrained patterning, especially many decades of ingrained patterning. It's, you know, I choose only to work with people who are choosing to come to me because they can see that I can bring something. I'm not out to go convince anyone to do anything differently, because I feel like that's bashing your head against the wall and take an aspirin for a headache. You know, it's not fixing the core problem. And so I observed a decade ago this trend of people coming into this field, whether it's market gardening or mixed farming, whatever it is, the majority of the people coming into regenerative agriculture are not from traditional farming backgrounds, I would say. And so they've got this almighty learning curve of starting to farm and running a business. And, you know, the statistics of running a small business are something like 95% of all small businesses fail. And I doubt there's any statistics on small farm businesses, but I imagine it would be up at 98 or something like that. And so I've always thought, since we set up this farm, it's like the single biggest point that will convince anyone to throw themselves in with the gusto that you would need to make this work is to focus on the economy. I've got to be able to show you that I can earn a Stockholm wage out in the middle of the countryside, in the middle of nowhere, having an incredibly meaningful, purposeful, joyful life. Because most people, let's face it, don't want to live an impoverished, stereotypical farming life, which is common over so many of the Western countries. We want to be right in the center of our communities. We want the community to lift farmers back up as a mainstay for that community to exist, right? And the only way to do that is to prosper and to, you know, regain the dignity of rural stewardship and be proud ourselves. Like farmers are stereotypical in their victim mentality. And I feel like that's an old way of thinking and relating. You know, like the skills needed to farm today are very different to my parents' generation. It's, you need to be social media savvy. You need to be able to communicate. This is specifically if you want to direct market your products, right? And so a lot of young folks are coming in armed up with a lot of skills that are incredibly useful for this type of farming. Now, I've chosen to focus on a fairly small, well, what anyone would call a small farm, but it's not small in terms of its productivity. And so there's a whole nother slant to this in that, well, how big a farm do you need? And as I get older, my question is always, how small can you go? Like, how little can you actually do to reach your holistic context? And so I think that's an important point. And so what I've tried to do since we set up the farm is just document everything. I've tried out hundreds of feed ration recipes. I've just tried and experimented and recorded and meticulously weighed every chicken I produced through every batch for years to create data that I could say with confidence, this is what I'm doing, this is why, and here's why I would recommend you don't consider X, Y, and Z, because I've already done it. And look, here's the data, and this is why you wouldn't want to do it. And the reason I did that is because when I came into farming, the only real source of useful data was Joel Salatin's books, which were already well outdated and not relevant to, certainly to us in the European context. And I just felt very grateful that someone had put the time and energy into compiling their thoughts and data and putting that in an accessible format for people. And so I decided there and then that that's what I would do. I would just compile data, compile particularly economic data and time and motion studies, so that anyone could pick that up and then test it in their own experience and scale it for themselves. If you can work twice as fast as me, well, you can handle this. But if you can only work half as fast as me, you're not going to be able to do that. So now look at the business sheet in that context, and will it lead you to, a healthy income for your family? And so that's really a massive part of what we're doing with the Regenerative Agriculture Masterclass, is really getting people to really look at their context, and referring specifically to Alan Savory's work and holistic context there, and then really exploring the financials of all the different things they want to do, because most people coming into this want to do way too much stuff. And my experience of that is that that doesn't lead to success. It leads to spreading yourself too thin and never perfecting anything. And so we are really in a due diligence process, you could say, to get people to really rein back in some of those ideas and nail it down and do all the hard work, the nuts and bolts that is not what draws them to this field in the first place. And that process is usually extremely powerful for people and leaves them extremely confident to make investments and get started, because they can see that plan in front of them. And then, like any plan, a business plan, a grazing plan, of course, life happens. It doesn't always happen in the way you intended, but it's very easeful to make decisions when you've already considered the whole, all the way through the whole year or whatever it is. It's very easy to adjust. And so people tend to move forward with confidence, and then with the network of people that they're working with and the exchange of ideas and experiences there, they're just refining and improving the systems that I've put out. So I'm sort of, I just keep rolling the systems that we've developed, but it's amazing to watch some of our students go off and tweak them and improve them and make them better suited to their cultural or climatic conditions, etc. And that's what that's fulfills my whole purpose with this. That's what I want to see. I want to see that spread all over.
One of the things that Jeff's really excited about that. One of the things that we've talked about, I think it was actually the first or the second long format interview that we did, you went into a lot of detail about the specific mindset that you have seen succeed in this space, and the mindset that has not really worked out for people who are trying to get into farming. Could you speak to that again, about the attitude and some of the personal traits of people that have done really well with this on an average, based on the experience you've had of students and interns coming through?
Yeah. I think the biggest part of that is to give up the right to being a victim. And the characters that I see succeed are they're there with me. It's like we're meeting at 6:30 to move animals. They're there at 6:29 when I turn up, every day. Doesn't matter if they're feeling slightly sick or tired or it's raining, they're always prepared. And they've always got the right tools lined up in the right order, ready to go. You know, it's like bright-eyed, bushy-tailed is a way to say. And I feel it's like that go-get-'em attitude that is needed to run a small business. You know, I don't know anyone in any field of life that runs a successful business that isn't prepared to do whatever needs to be done whenever it needs doing. And farming is 100% like that. You know, it's not dinner time. It's let's go check that you actually remembered to turn the fence on because you weren't sure. It's like, that's, you know, what I do in our education setting is teach people a lot about discipline and responsibility, because something on my personal journey is seeing the younger generation lose some of these core values that I was brought up very traditionally in a very strict way. It would be seen like that nowadays. But I really value those things, and I've benefited hugely in my life from the rigor that my parents brought me up with. And I think I've seen a lot of younger people coming through to my training programs, and I am concerned by that lack of attention, lack of discipline, because that spreads way beyond farming. There's, you know, it's no way to live life, let alone farm. And I think farming is an incredibly hard profession. However smart we can do it, it requires that diligence. And as I said before, all the types of farming that I advocate are entirely observation based. So I'm testing people all the time to see how they think and see how they look at things. Because a lot of people look at things but don't really see what's actually in front of them, you know? So I always like to test people to see what's going on in their mind. And then what I'm trying to do as an educator is push them on the specific learning edges they need. And that takes time to learn where those people are at. And that's something that's very limited in the digital sphere. That's something that we can only really do on the farm, day to day, day in, day out, as it were. But the characters that always succeed are the ones that are always ready on time and organized. And they're always questioning and wondering why, and they're never afraid to ask or reach out for help. That's a really important thing. And they take in a lot of notes too, and reflecting on those little observations, because I watch people observing things, but then they've forgotten when it was, or when was the last time we grazed here? And they remember what happened, but they can't remember the date. So they don't know the recovery time. So when they go to create their grazing plan, they've got no idea about recovery times. But a diligent person is taking notes and photos and videos and building a massive amount of resources in that same amount of time. So I think that's important. I think to make farms work, we need total diligence, total commitment, and a commitment to our holistic context, because farming is hard on relationships. We're living in a kind of isolated profession. You know, most people go to work 9 till 5 or 6 till 3, whatever it is, and then they get to go home and turn off their brain and not think about work till the next day and see their kids and have dinner. And you know, but farming's not like that. It's like the cows have escaped and they're on the highway and it's dinner time. My kids are like wet the bed and one's out in the forest, but we still have to go and sort the cows out. So it's, you know, it isolates us. We don't have the same social life as most people, and that can be really tough on relationships. And so that commitment to our holistic context is so important, because we constantly need to refine how things are going. It's very easy to be totally consumed by a farm, and I think most farmers can relate to that they've probably spent some time, maybe many years, just so consumed that they haven't lifted their head up and looked around and, wow, my kids are growing up, my wife's unhappy, or I never actually got that car in the garage fixed that I've dreamt about since I was a teenager, or whatever it is, right? And so that's a big part of, yeah, the importance of the network is for reassurance and the sort of social guidance there, I guess, and just to to normalize our different stories. And that's something I've really observed every year in my education. Is every year there seems to be a theme to the year, you know, like everyone's having massive pest problems, but like all over the world, or everyone's having relationship problems, like all over the world. I don't know if it's just my strange perception in it, but it seems to be like there are common issues, but most people feel they haven't got anyone to talk to about it, you know? It's interesting. But yeah, speaking out, being able to speak out, being able to get your hands in, learning skills, always jumping into for the sake of experience. You know, the people that do best are the people that say, hey, I saw you do that. How do you tie that knot? You know, oh, can you show me how to sharpen that blade? And then I'll sharpen all your other ones. And that sort of attitude is really important, I think. And to be humble as well, to realize that there's something to learn off everyone if we're open and humble enough to see that. And yeah, there's many other points maybe about that, but maybe that's
No, that's great. And I really love hearing you talk about this because it echoes a lot of what we've heard from other farmers, from my own experience briefly in very different types of farming, from huge orchards in Australia to small permaculture farms in Guatemala. There are a lot of commonalities among the experience. And I think it's really great that you address these and talk about it in your videos and in the course. And to that end, why don't we come full circle and have you tell us about what puts this masterclass in its own category? What differentiates it from other online farming courses? And what can students really expect to get out of it? What are the main things that they'll be able to take away from this experience?
Well, it's set up to be the sort of broadest reaching program out there for people that want to start from scratch, design a land plan, develop a family or business context very clearly, and design that land plan down to pennies and dollars or whatever it is. Totally refine the enterprises that they want to run and work out all of their sales, marketing, branding things, put that into a multi-year phase plan and a whole farm economic plan, and get to a point where they are confident that their vision makes sense and is doable. That's it in a nutshell. But that, you know, that takes a lot of work. So it's a training that's not for the faint-hearted. I'm not here to spoon feed people at all. I'm here to bounce with and lead people further that are already willing to put in that groundwork for themselves, because I can't offer them anything otherwise. And so I'm not going to do a keyline master plan of your 200 hectare farm in Portugal, but I'll stay up all night and give you feedback once you've done it, you know? So that's kind of my attitude. It's like, hey, I'll meet you anywhere, but you've got to be invested in it, because there's no point me. And I learned this years ago educating, where often people with a lot of fiscal resources hired me to come and drop beautiful detailed farm plans on them because they wanted to sort of buy this dream. And then they, in nearly all cases, they miss the most important bits, you know, because they just don't understand the processes or the context behind it. It's why I stopped doing direct consulting and I started to do educational consulting, where it's like, hey, we can get a load of people here. You can build a network. They will pay for my time, but you've got to sit through this whole training, and I'm going to put you on the hot seat all the time, because if you don't get it, there's no point doing any of this, right? And so our training it's got a breadth and openness in that. It's like, I'll meet you wherever you want to go, but if you want to sit in the shadows and not upload your map and you haven't done the work, then I can only give you the resources. That's all I can do. And it's a huge amount of resources. There's 80 hours of video lectures and field walks, and there's planning spreadsheets for all the enterprises, so that if you, say, want to run a pastured poultry enterprise in Czech Republic, you have to go out and find market data, feed prices, regulations, and then you can plug them in and you've got a solid enterprise sketch for what that looks like in your country. And now you've also got 5 other people who are already doing that in the country, who you can now go and see their place, make the plan, refine it with them, feedback those details for anyone else that might want to know them, and then get on with it, right? So it's a very broad spectrum training. We're looking at 13 different enterprises. You know, a lot of the trainings out there today are limited to, say, market gardening or whatever it is. We're looking at market gardening, mushroom production, all the different animals you could possibly raise, agroforestry systems, nursery systems, you know, and just trying to expose people to the whole gambit so that they can, like a big part of what I did in our book as well with Regenerative Agriculture is trying to formulate recipes specifically thinking of the people coming into farming who don't have an understanding of that. And this originally came about as a response to the boom in market gardening, because what I felt is that most of the famous market gardeners aren't experienced farmers. They're experienced vegetable growers. And actually, market gardening is the least profitable farming enterprise you could run. And that's what my data and every other farmer's data I've looked at says. So I kind of wanted to push back against that bit and say, well, hey, yeah, you can do that. But did you know you can make the same living doing a third of the work if you just had a little bit more land? And so I really wanted to put together and formulate recipes. And I thought about this for a very long time, because on one hand, I'm aware that humans are drawn to standardized solutions. And on the other hand, there are no standardized solutions in farming. However, the pattern language behind everything is very much similar around the world. So what I've tried to do is look at scale, look at investment costs, look at output and revenue, and look at time and motion studies for all these different enterprises on a level playing field. And the way I chose to do that was like, if I do that here in Sweden in this setting, this is how these things look. So now at least we've got a level playing field to look at, like, okay, if I invest, or if I want to get a family salary out of any of these enterprises, what scale must they be? How much will it cost to set that up? How much time will it take every year to run that? And what will the sales look like? You know, how much goes into all of it? And so that's been really hard work to pull together, but it's been very enlightening for people, because it really instantly allows people to break apart airy dream they've had for possibly 10 years and just see that will not work here, full stop, you know, and open up other avenues. Like I've said to you before, Oliver, I've had so many people come to our farm who want to be graziers and they've ended up being market gardeners, and the other way around. They've wanted to be a market gardener and they've set up an incredible pastoral poultry business. And that's really where it all comes back to context, is when people go through that exercise powerfully and properly, and especially in a sort of safe environment with their peers, because most people are not familiar with talking about their highest values and deepest motivations. You know, they've never been encouraged to by their family, their siblings, university, whatever it is. It can really, yeah, it can be one of the most powerful things people actually do in their lives, and really forge a new pathway. So I would say, yeah, what sets it apart is the pure amount of information that's there for people to take on and digest over time. They can digest, it's an 8-week live training, but people can, it's lifetime access, so people can go back to that, and they can also join the live training each time it runs, so they can go through processes again, or they can connect with new people and update what's going on for them and get further feedback over time. And that's cool. We're developing, you know, a family network, you could say. But I think there's probably only one other training that exists online that looks at the sort of breadth of things that we're talking about here. And I think that's probably the Agrarians course, which is also an excellent course. So, you know, there's nothing bad to say about that. It's
Don't worry, I've got
more.
a call with Darren tomorrow. We're going to get him on this program as well.
Yeah. Just depends who you want to listen to rabbiting on, I guess.
No, I mean, you know, the idea is to pair farms in transition to the most appropriate program for what they're trying to achieve.
Sure.
We're casting a wide net for this.
Sure.
Well, excellent. That was really well explained. I really love what you're doing with the community and the fact that people can stay on for long periods of time. So you have people in your community that are at various stages of implementing what they've learned and can inform people who are, you know, 1 year back or learn from people who are a couple of years ahead. That's brilliant. Jeff,
Hopefully.
is there anything else that you would like to ask or add to before we wrap it up?
That was awesome. I've got so many notes, and I love I didn't realize lifetime access meant that they could join the live courses again. That's rad. Great idea. That's awesome.
I think it's really cool because what we'll do is probably develop the mentor team more and more. And their input is, I mean, they're working in our Facebook group to answer very specific questions from their experience. And that's really nice to have like 5 mentors who you know are mentors answering the question, as well as maybe a dozen to 100 random people who you're sort of just meeting that you might not feel confident in, you know. But over time, I think that could develop a lot. And I think that as people develop themselves, they can be drawn into that program. So it can just keep feeding off each other. And, you know, and I'm trying to encourage people to document so that they've got the same level of resources that I've built up here. You know, it's like, well, why not? Who knows what you could do with it? You could write a book, you could whatever. It's just like, but you need that information anyway, so you may as well get it down in a usable format, and it will only help you and everyone else. So
yeah, it
but
helps.
Who
learning.
knows? It's
and it helps. It's like giving a gift to your future self, having that in the future. You're like, oh my gosh, I have all this data, this material, this media, book, whatever, data, studies. Yeah. So,
but mainly just the confidence and the peace of mind of like knowing that you're on top of everything, you know, because it's so, I've been to so many farms where it's just like panic mode, everything's like, and it's just a high level of stress from just not being organized, but still doing everything that we do in a day. It's just, we're not stressed because we know that we plant this on this day and we're going to harvest this on this day, and we don't have to think about it. It's like, it's all planned well ahead. And like, but that's what everyone needs to be doing, you know, and just bringing up the sort of professionalism of how that works and how it's communicated. And yeah,
that's an important skill to have and to teach. And our world doesn't teach us the organization, given that it's our school system breeds factory workers, not well organized people who are good at running finances. There's no financial literacy, et cetera. So yeah, this is great. Thanks for all the work you're doing. It's helping farms, it's helping people individually in their personal lives. And yeah, so I've even found myself getting a little bit more organized watching your videos and some of the things and points about it. I'm like, oh yeah, all right. Yeah, I need to do, yeah. Okay, that's great. Like in business stuff, not even farming. So yeah, cheers, thanks.
Nice.
So what do we say we wrap up real quickly with a bit of a soundbite that we can use for our promo?
If you're ready to transition to a profitable regenerative farming future this year, then join me, Richard Perkins, and Climate Farmers on the Pioneer program, and we'll get you all the training, the information and support you need to succeed. So don't hesitate and sign up today.